today I have a fast and fun, easy flower burst scrubby. For this project, I'm just using some cotton yarn that I have left over in my stash. You won't need a whole bunch, and to make it that scrubby feeling, I am holding this scrubby yarn together with this cotton yarn. Now, I did a review on this scrubby yarn a while ago. It's that Stitch Soak Scrub yarn. It's a Lion brand yarn, and it's very difficult to work with alone. You can kind of see where it has these chains, and that's how the yarn is woven up. And if you're just using this, it's very hard to determine what is your chain or your stitch. So I suggested that using this with a cotton yarn held together might be a little bit easier so you can find your stitches better, and that definitely works. So for this project, we're using that Stitch Soak Scrub yarn held together with just some leftover yellow cotton yarn that I had in my stash. I'm going to be using a 5.5mm crochet hook. You'll also need scissors and a yarn needle to weave in your ends. To start, you can start with a chain 4 and slip stitch into that first chain to create a ring, or if you're brave, you can work and start with a magic ring. Make sure you're holding both of your strands together. You can see I've got that teal scrubby yarn and my cotton yarn. I'm holding them together so this acts as one strand of yarn. We're going to start with a chain 3, and we're going to work 7 double crochets into that ring. And you just have to go really slow at first until your fingers and your hook realize that those two strands are one. And it does get easier the more you work with this. So I'm going to work a total of 7 more double crochets. So I have a total of 8. That chain 3 does count as a double crochet. So you want 8 total stitches for round 1. Once you've worked your 7 double crochets into that ring, we're just going to pull those tails closed, and working with those 2 strands. It might be a little bit difficult to get those pulled completely, and then you just want to find the top of your chain 3 and working in both the cotton yarn and the scrubby yarn, slip stitch to join that round, and you've got a little circle. We're going to be working puff stitches for round 2, and before I go on, you can see my tails here. I suggest leaving a little bit longer of a tail than this, only because this will be more difficult to thread up and weave in at the end, but it doesn't really matter as far as the pattern or the project. It just will make it a little bit easier for you if you have a longer tail to work with to weave those ends in. So moving on to round 2, we're going to chain 2, and we're going to be working a puff stitch into each chain or stitch all the way around. I'm going to work a puff stitch. To work a puff stitch, you want to work these very loose. Yarn over, put your hook in the same spot, and pull up a loop once. Do that again. Same spot twice. One more time. And that third one gets a little bit tight, but do them as loose as you can, because when you go to yarn over and pull back through everything, it'll make it a lot easier if your stitches are looser. So this round is difficult in that you're pulling through that scrubby yarn and you're making puff stitches. Just remember to make those puff stitches very loose. Chain 2, and go into your next stitch and work a puff stitch. So the pattern repeat for this round is puff stitch, chain 2, puff stitch in the next, chain 2, and so on all the way around. and then we will join where we started. Just remember to make those yarn overs and pull-ups very loose. So I'll meet you right back here. Once you're back around and you have your 8 puffs, you're going to end chaining 2 after that last puff, and you just want to slip stitch to that first stitch, one of those first stitches, whatever feels right to you, since sometimes it is hard to see where we are in a project, especially when we're using these scrubby type yarns. For round 3, we're going to be chaining 3 to start, and we're going to jump to that first space in between your puffs. So we're over here and we're going to skip this first puff and work in the space. So this round is much easier because we're just working in spaces. We have our chain 3. We're going to work a single crochet V-stitch in that space. So single crochet, chain 2, single crochet in that same space. We're going to chain 2 in between our V-stitches, skip the next puff, and work a single crochet V-stitch in the next space. Single crochet, chain 2, single crochet. Chain 2, find the next space, and work a single crochet V-stitch. And that is the pattern for row 3. You're just going to be creating these single crochet V-stitches into each space in between the puffs, and those V stitches are separated by a chain 2, and that just helps us get all the way around without having any major bunching. It kind of acts as our increase. So I'm going to work this pattern all the way around, and I'll meet you back to finish the round. I forgot to mention that if you find it hard to determine where you started, you can always use a stitch marker, and that chain 3 that we did to start the round, you can just put that in there, work around, and then you know that that's where you started. So I've worked up to this point. I've got a puff stitch here, and here's that first puff stitch that we skipped. So I want to skip this puff stitch and work in the space right there for my last V-stitch. I'm going to remove this stitch marker since I know where I'm at right now. Chain 2. I'm going to work a single crochet on this last V-stitch and chain 2, and there's our chain 3, and I just want to slip stitch to the second, so there's one second stitch of that chain 3 that we did to start the round, and that will act as the end of our V-stitch. So there is round 3. For round 4, we're going to do much of the same thing. We're working the single crochet V-stitch into each chain 2 space. So remember, we had a chain 2 worked in our V-stitches, but we also had that chain 2 worked from the spaces in between our V-stitches. So we have a lot of single crochet V-stitches in this round. So here's our first chain 2 space. It lines up right where we ended. We're going to chain 3, and this counts as part of our V-stitch, our single crochet, chain 2, and then we're going to work a single crochet in that same space. So there's our first V-stitch. We're going to stick our stitch marker in that first V-stitch. The next space that we have, that chain 2 space, is part of our V-stitch. You can tell because there's 2 stitches right there, and there's our space. We're not chaining anything in between working our V-stitches, we're just working V-stitches. So single crochet, chain 2, single crochet in the same to finish our V-stitch. Here's our next space, and that was a chain 2 space. There's our next V-stitch. So we're working in that chain 2 space, and we're going to just work a single crochet V-stitch. Single crochet, chain 2, single crochet in the same. There's our V-stitch. Work a V-stitch. Single crochet, chain 2, single crochet, same. And you're going to work that pattern all the way around, and I'll show you how to finish up when we get back to our stitch marker. I am back around. I've got my last V-stitch. Here's my stitch marker. That was my first V-stitch. I've got this chain 2 space here, so I'm going to go ahead and work a single crochet, chain 2, and instead of working back into that same space, I'm just going to work into that V-stitch space here, so right where my stitch marker is, and I'm just going to slip stitch. And that will finish our round. I'm going to take my stitch marker out and fasten off, weave in my ends, and I will be right back. I've taken care of all of my ends. I've got a nice, useful project at the end of this. It's a nice scrubby. These would make great gifts. You can use any cotton yarn that you have. You don't even have to mix this with a scrubby type yarn if you didn't want to. The scrubby type yarn kind of just gives it a little bit more texture, but these would be fantastic using just cotton as well. I hope you enjoyed this quick flower burst scrubby tutorial. Until next time, everyone, happy crocheting. Bye.